Welcome to Sacred Stories Podcast, a place to explore and discuss new and exciting books of consciousness. I am your host, Reverend Patricia Caginello, and speaking with authors that have shared their wisdom and stories through their books is one of my favorite things to do. Today we are speaking with Dr. Jane Galloway, a contributing author to our new book, Chaos to Clarity, Sacred Stories of Transformational Change, which is a beautiful and powerful collection of personal stories from people from around the world who have experienced significant change in their lives and have come through stronger and with insights to share. So Dr. Jane Galloway is the author of The Gateways, The Wisdom of 12-Step Spirituality, Dynamic Practices That Work, and founder of T.R.I.B.E, Transformation, Realization, Inspiration, Belonging, Expression. Dr. Galloway is also a career actor, ordained minister, painter, and playwright. So it is my absolute delight to say, welcome Jane Galloway to Sacred Stories.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really delighted to have you on, and I'm delighted to have you and your story as part of Chaos to Clarity.
Thanks. It's a wonderful anthology. I'm delighted to be part of it.
Thanks. Yeah, I think so too. So your title, the title of the story that you shared in Chaos to Clarity is A Badass Butterfly Conversion, A Woman's Liberation. What is the story about?
The story is about a dramatic, really conversion moment that I had when I was pretty much at an emotional bottom. A bright light came into the room, and my life never was the same after that night. So that's kind of the moment. That's it.
So it's the story, right? So it is the story of your conversion, and it's the story of well, I'll let you tell it. I don't want to take the stage from you. Tell us your story that you wrote for Chaos to Clarity, please.
It begins really with it only took a moment, and it really only did. I think when we get into these dimensions of the metaphysical, the spiritual, a moment could be 2 seconds or 2 years. Time becomes a different kind of situation. But it was not a rock bottom, as many, I think, people describe hitting bottom with alcohol, with drugs. I never liked talking just about alcohol and drugs. That's what I stopped using as of that night. But it was an emotional bottom. Alcohol and drugs are medication, essentially. And they eventually turn on us. But the rock bottom situation sounds like a lot of broken bones and crumbling down at the bottom of a ravine. From the very beginning of my experience, I have said it was more like a trampoline bounce for me. So I was in a very low place emotionally, facing some emotional losses, a kind of the final last straw, had happened just earlier that evening. But something I wanted to clarify is that I was on the outside, and to many, many people, doing incredibly well. I was performing in a hit Broadway show, off-Broadway show, so sorry. I was appearing on television regularly. I was sometimes appearing on the New York Post page 6 gossip column as part of that whole experience. People assumed things were one way, but I knew they were another. And so what happened was my former partner and good friend, I mean, he and I had been, really on a journey together, came over. We had separated already, but he came over that night for dinner, and we were talking, and he told me that he was planning to get married. And it really threw me. I mean, even though we were not meant to be together, and I knew that very clearly, and I'm sure he did too by that time. The moment was just felt like a total shock, abandonment, loss, which is interesting. I don't think we ever quite know what's going to catapult us into a moment of real change. But he told me that. I chattered away. We were, enjoying cocktails and various things, dinner. He left, and I was lying in bed reading. It's funny, denial for people who have any familiarity with addiction. I was lying in bed holding a book and drinking Courvoisier. I mean, I could have been reading it upside down, but we kind of have denial with ourselves. It's one of the big things is the left hand not knowing what the right hand was doing. So anyway, so I just had this moment. Oh, it was unbelievable. I suddenly had this feeling of, it was visual, and I'm very visual. I paint, I draw, I do all kinds of visual things. So I had a very visual experience here, but I suddenly saw myself at the center of a total circle of isolation. And I got it, that I had pushed the last person out who really tried to be in my life. And I just saw myself in this existential void. It's something that I don't wish on anyone. It was a horrible, horrible feeling of just free floating in the universe, not in the great, wonderful way that some people describe experiences of weightlessness. This was awful. And literally, mercifully, moments later, the light changed in the room and became very, very bright. And I heard a voice. So that's where the clairaudience, I guess, then came in. And the voice said, "It's over, it's the drinking." Very clear, very clear. Now, I had stopped into an AA meeting 6 months before, but that meeting, I couldn't believe what I was hearing there, because I was hearing that I, needed to stop doing all drugs, and I wasn't even acknowledging to myself that I took diet pills. A lot of actors did in those days. I don't know what they take now, but they're thinner now than we even were then. So I don't know what's going on. But so it took me 6 months of really struggling with this. Once you've heard that message, it's hard to not have heard it. But I had stashed that meeting book that I got in the back of a desk drawer and pretended to myself that I didn't know where it was. But the minute I had that light flashing moment, I got out of bed and went in there and found that meeting book and found a meeting for the next morning. And that began an entirely other journey. I then talk about something that happened at a subsequent meeting where I had even more of an experience of, it kind of felt like the continuation of that initial moment of waking up when I was invited by the person who was leading this AA meeting I attended. He said, "Young lady, would you like to share something?" at the very end of the meeting. And, I was we drop our defenses and our delusions slowly. I thought, oh, he probably thinks I'm a reporter from the New York Times here doing an article about the meeting. Sure, I'll go up. It was ridiculous. I was crawling into that meeting, all dressed up. And again, the outside was what I was putting most of my focus on at that point. So I went up to the front of the room and I said something I had not planned to say. I looked out at this room full of people and I said, "My name's Jane and I'm an alcoholic." And at that moment, my entire life flashed before my eyes. Now, I tell you for real, this happened. So I know, and I've worked in hospice since and with many people as they're transitioning, I know this is real. Every single millisecond of my entire life to that point flashed before my eyes. And and then I said to the group, I said, "Well, I had this experience and this voice came into I was up there trying to act all together and suddenly this was not happening." And I said, I had this moment where the light changed and I heard a voice and I looked out at this room of people, all of them. This was a noon meeting in Manhattan, New York. So, these were business people who had taken, their lunch hour to go to this meeting. Some were eating a sandwiches. And I'm telling this about this experience and they're all nodding as though they got it. And that's the first, wow, because nobody hanging out, in the Broadway theater district was nodding when I said, well, this voice came into my room, et cetera. So in that moment, I really also had the awareness of that something had happened, something dramatic had happened with that light flashing before my eyes. I used to say, I had the same social security number, the same address, etc., but that I had evolved to another dimension. I had kind of like I evolved to another lifetime, and that has never changed. That began a totally different direction in my life, and an insatiable search for the spiritual. So that's pretty much what the story is about. And I give the metaphor of how the monarch butterfly really does that amazing transformation. It is not a light little process. So that's what I've been doing for the ensuing years.
And Jane, and tell us it's been decades. Tell us how long you've been
Yeah,
on the
it's
journey.
been 40 years. That was 40 years ago. So it seems like a second ago, but in many ways, but it's been 40 years of working with others in really everything I do. I mean, I really embarked that day upon a deep learning process. And this is where the 12 steps are a miracle. I think the organizational part of AA and the rules that a lot of people start focusing on are things that luckily I never even encountered. I mean, my father had been in AA for many years, 23 years when he died, and I loved AA. I just didn't think it had anything to do with me. So I embarked, fortunately, upon the spiritual path of the 12 steps and began to really work that. So yeah, it was 40 years ago.
It's just it's such an inspiring story, and I know that a story that so many will be able to relate to or draw hope from, right? That you talk about how it was more of a trampoline bounce than rock bottom.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
And sometimes I wonder about I wonder if men or people, and I don't mean to do some binary thing because everybody's different, but I think there's some sort of mythology around, crashing and burning, and that was not my experience. I was at an emotional bottom, and I had so much grief to process, which I did, trust me, especially my first 90 days. And I talk about that in my book, The Gateways, really in greater depth about this incredible purge I went through. But yeah, for me, it was a merciful, thank God. I mean, I couldn't have stood hanging out at the bottom of some rock bottom. The way people describe this always just makes me feel like, oh my God, that's not what I hit. I hit a trampoline, a merciful, amazing rerouting of my entire life course.
Mm. Oh, absolutely. And you've gone on not only to publish The Gateways, but you are an ordained minister, you have founded T.R.I.B.E, you have continued your creative expression. I mean, your contributions, in your journey are many, and they continue.
Thank you.
It really is an inspiration. I do want to ask you, for those that are listening and they are, possibly at that emotional bottom or really feeling that they do need to change course, right, in some way, what would you say to them? What kind of insights or support or would you give them?
Absolutely. Listening? I would love to speak to those people. You know who you are, and at your very deepest core part of your being that you came here for a purpose. And that initial part of you has gone through many dangers, toils, and snares, and whatever the addiction is you've taken on to cover up and try to just function becomes such a distorting situation that we end up being somebody who's not who we really are. So what I would say to anybody who's struggling with addiction is, you know who you are. Really remember who that is and know that that is your beautiful divine gift to the planet, and that is who you need to emerge and we need to emerge. And as you and higher consciousness, God, spirit, however you call whatever is the creator of all life, when we connect back to that, it's an amazing process of healing that you're in for. And we need you to be you, because we need, if everybody's really functioning from their true person, then we're working in a universe of harmony. And so what I would say is, you know who you are. And the people, one of the things about addiction is this: most recovering alcoholics, or most alcoholics, active alcoholics and addicts I know, have such a strict moral code they are feeling bound by, that they have to drink and use drugs in order to loosen it up. Now, that's so weird for people who are saying, oh my God, you did all these awful things, and yeah. The point is that that strict moral code keeps us bound, so that when we finally let loose, and then of course we're not operating in our right mind, stuff happens, and people think that's who they are, and that their actions while inebriated or their actions while high define them. That is not it. That's the release of, these strictures. And so part of the process of the steps is really it's not the only way to get sober, but boy, I recommend it. I think it's just a lifelong evolutionary path that only has a little bit to do with the drug, whatever drug it is you use, So the thing is, there's a whole lifelong path of loosening those chains, really. And a lot of them come from parental expectations and ideas. I think even some are soul contracts that come from other lifetimes. And, the process of getting sober is to not need to loosen up through some sort of chemical or a process. People get addicted to porn and internet and all kinds of shopping and blah, blah, all these things. And one of the things about that is that our body really creates all those crazy chemicals. So people will find whatever to get them out of being in their center. So I would just say, don't lose hope, but understand that really you know who you are. And that's who we want you to find. That's who I hope you can find.
Right. Thank you for that. And just briefly, the story that you share in Chaos to Clarity does go on to talk about the, not to get binary again, but to really talk about maybe what is more of an older paradigm around recovery, right? And more of a punitive kind of a look. And, you have this great line in there that says, what a way to waste a miracle, or something like that, right? Right? Looking, perceiving, right? Let's just talk about that for a moment, because what is a really big message for me and the work that I'm doing, and we parallel in so many ways, Jane, is the idea of, and I say it makes no sense to me, we come from largely a very patriarchal, punitive, original sin, have to ask for forgiveness paradigm, right? That's what we're taught. Right. And then we have these traumatic events that happen, and we move into or seek into this spiritual opening, this awakening. And then our languaging is, well, we have to learn a lesson, and we keep repeating lessons until we figure it out, until we get it right. And I'm just like, oh my God, can we get out of this punitive? We're always being punished. We're always doing something wrong, right? So whether it's the religious framework that tells us we're not good enough, or we have to fix something, or the spiritual framework that's telling us we're not good enough, or we have to fix something, it's all we're using the same language, right?
Absolutely.
And it's maddening to say, wait a second, let's change the languaging around this. Let's change the energy around this, and we wonder why people are spinning, and they don't move forward or can't move forward because they're still fixing themselves, because there's still something wrong. So, you speak in your book, of course, and in your writings and your work since the Gateways, but you also speak about this idea in about As Butterfly Conversion, the story that you wrote for Chaos to Clarity, about looking at this from a perspective of a liberating perspective instead of a punitive. Can you just speak to that just briefly?
Absolutely. I would love to. Yeah, I say that, this kind of radical rearrangement of all of one's molecules is often referred to as a conversion experience. But like most dominant cultural narratives, conversion stories, very much what you're speaking to, Patricia, are most often told through the male experience, and all of this punitive kind of control stuff that you're talking about. The light frequently shows up in conversion stories, but the male dominant narrative most often adds an element of a punitive self-flagellation, bad old me. And if you think about Augustine, who's kind of one of the fathers of the Western church, oh my God, he hated his body. And Paul on the road to Damascus had many, many issues with women, anyway. So what I say in that little section, I'm just going to read this one short section where it says, what a great way to waste a miracle. A supernatural visit pulls you out of utter despair, and the next thing you do is slap on a lot of negatives and rules and restrictions for the new life you've been granted. This was not my kind of conversion, thank God, but you're right. There is pressure in the culture to do this, to be mad at yourself and put yourself down, oh, bad me. Women who live in a male-dominated society often become addicted, I believe, after being smashed into male-defined social roles that destroy our volition, our agency, and our power. These roles turn us into basically female impersonators or dancers hungry for the male gaze or male approval. Even in recovery, turbaned yogis and 12-step male gurus of all ages abound. The language of 12 steps meetings can be so toxic and illness-based too. And people, this is important to say, that even the most liberated female spirit can be easily crushed. So, it's important to understand, what does recovery, what does spiritual awakening on an evolutionary path look like? And we have to re-examine, or I had to re-examine, all of those beliefs. You mentioned original sin, and I went to this part of this process over the last 40 years. I went back to graduate school and studied original texts and have a doctorate in religion. And one of the things you learn in looking at the original text is that this was a theological construct of control, this idea of original sin. The original blessing is as much part of the several narratives in the creation story in Genesis as this thing that's been woven into original sin. So, really, I feel that the best metaphor, especially for women, but really for anybody, I think we're all being just oppressed by this patriarchal, punitive system. The best metaphor is that it's an evolutionary, transformational process. And that doesn't mean that it's that easy either. I mean, I talk about the metaphor of the butterfly's conversion from a chrysalis to a butterfly. That's intense. It's an intense I used to talk about this when I led spiritual communities for 15 years. And, I'm not saying I'm finished with that completely, but I'm on a break from that for writing, regrouping, et cetera, and teaching at another level. And when I used to lead these communities, I would talk to people about this kind of conversion experience. People have a hard time sometimes. They want to either completely reject any sort of process-oriented healing and transforming that gives them a new framework, or they really are hung up on this original teaching. It has to be examined. But when I looked at the monarch butterfly, because a lot of us are planting ragweed and, really trying to repopulate the monarch population. So I got very interested in monarch butterflies this last summer. And this conversion is nothing short of miraculous. It starts with an inner organic shedding of the outer form of the caterpillar while it's still inside the chrysalis. And then I was reading about it and learning and looking at videos. The caterpillar's head splits open. The skin falls away while the inside of the chrysalis becomes a kind of goo or slime. I would say I was a goo or slime in certain of these evolutionary moments, but the slime miraculously turns into wings. What a great metaphor, right? And the beautiful butterfly stretches and flies away. Think monarch. I say, think monarch, think birth, think life. And I think it's so much better a metaphor. You know, addiction, we live in a society, if you try to watch television for 45 minutes, you will see 10 pharmaceutical ads. We are in a time when we are being given subtle and not so subtle messages to medicate ourselves constantly.
Right.
So the idea that we've decided which drugs are legal and which drugs aren't, and who should be guilty about it and who should be, is really not, you just have to think that through for a few minutes and realize that the whole culture is being encouraged to drug itself all the time. So getting rid of the guilt and the pain and getting back to our essential self, I feel, it's certainly in my experience, when I have been empowered to actually listen to that still small voice within, and that's the voice of God, when
Right.
I've really been empowered to we know who we are. We don't need drugs. And maybe if you need drugs, talk to your doctor about it. But I don't have a judgment about that either way, or about drinking at all. If you can do it and not have it take you on a strange path, I have no problem with that at all.
Right.
So anyway, that's the deal.
Well, thank you. There's so much to talk about. The subject is absolutely vast, and you really shine, a light on it, and in your beautiful story that you shared for Chaos to Clarity. So, so we're going to leave it there for now, but of course,
Okay.
There's more conversations to come as well. So, Dr. Jane Galloway shared your story titled A Badass Butterfly Conversion, A Woman's Liberation in our book, Chaos to Clarity, Sacred Stories of Transformational Change. And I just want to say thank you before I even say thank you for joining us, tell the audience how they can get in touch with you, what's your website, and so forth.
Yes, my website is janegalloway.com. And that's the best way to get in touch with me. Also, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all those things. I'm not that into Twitter, but I love Instagram and Facebook. And I post frequently. So, and I do it to connect a community. I have followers from all over the world, and I love it. I feel like that's kind of the new definition of community, not a brick and mortar place, but a community of consciousness.
Yeah, I agree. It is a beautiful way to create community, and for community to reach people who don't have the capability or the conscious community around them. I mean, that's something that I'm finding the internet for, it does do a lot of really wonderful things. And many people, you live in an area, I know in California, and I live in an area here on the East Coast where we actually have a lot of conscious community, or we could get to conscious community, fairly easily. But I've connected with so many people through the internet that say, like, you're the only one that gets it. Like, there's nothing or no one around here where they're currently living. And so it really does create that opportunity for people to come together.
Yes, yeah.
So it's
absolutely,
wonderful.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love it. I think it's a replication of a quantum field. It's just amazing. We get to plug in to people really all over the world, all over the globe.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I agree. So that's janegalloway.com.
janegalloway.com, absolutely. And so thank you very much. And thank you, the audience, for being here and for listening. You've been listening to the Sacred Stories podcast. We've been talking with Dr. Jane Galloway about her story in our new book, Chaos to Clarity, Sacred Stories of Transformational Change, which is available through Amazon and booksellers worldwide, or direct from Sacred Stories Publishing. I am your host, Reverend Patricia Caginello, and until next time, as always, I encourage you to write your sacred story well.